Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's begin today's session of the Hindu analysis with the first article that talks about India's vaccination record and focuses on this important fact that the reason why India did not really have to face a lot of casualties in the third wave is because of the impressive vaccination coverage that we have ensured in India in the past year or so. The article says that just a month ago, if you look at the number of cases that India was witnessing of COVID, it was a huge number as compared to what we are seeing right now. A month ago, India was reporting about 1.7 lakh cases every day, and now it has plummeted to an average of 6,000 cases. Globally, India right now is contributing only 0.7% of the cases, while India has somewhere around 16% of the global population. Also, the vaccination records in India are extremely impressive. Over 75% of those who are above the age of 15 years are now fully vaccinated, and the reports also suggest that over 90% of Indians have either been exposed to the virus or they have been vaccinated. So, combination of exposure to the virus and vaccination has ensured that at least for the coming few months, most of India's population is safeguarded from the disease, not from the infection. You can still get infection, you can still have a mild infection, but most probably it would not really result in your condition becoming extremely severe. Thus, it puts to rest all those debates about whether or not the vaccinations are helping people live or not. The government of India pointed out that 92% people who died of COVID since January this year were actually unvaccinated people. Thus, it is concrete proof that vaccination is not just saving your lives, but it is also reducing the burden on the government of India. As of today, India has administered about 178 crore vaccine doses, which is much higher than any country in the world if we don't really consider the figures of China, because those figures are not really trusted by any agency around the world. Now, while appreciating the government's efforts and the efforts of the people in India, the article also cautions the fact that we are still not out of the pandemic as yet. There may be a fourth wave in the coming months, and India thus needs to get ready with a proper supply chain to ensure that we have enough stocks of vaccine whenever we require them. The article says that although the government of India has given a go ahead to a lot of vaccine in the past few months, including vaccines from Biological E, Genova, Zydus Cadila, but none of these vaccines have actually been rolled out. So there is still a mismatch between the government approving the vaccine and those vaccines coming into the hands of the people. Thus, the government must ensure that that gap is filled. The second warning sign here is that a lot of nations across the world have vaccinated people from the age of 12 and above, while India has only vaccinated people above the age of 15. So once we open up the age barrier from 12 to 15 or lower age groups, then India would again require a lot of vaccine stocks. So the article here says that the government should be ready for that challenge also in the future. Now, while appreciating the government is fine on one end, the other side that needs to be appreciated for this is the citizens themselves. India is one of the few countries in the world that is not really witnessing a lot of vaccine hesitancy. In fact, you see some of the most developed nations in the world, including US, Canada, France, etc., where people are extremely hesitant to get vaccines. There are a lot of rumors going around that the vaccine will not help you, it will harm you, etc. And the people themselves are saying that it is our right to decide whether or not we want to get a vaccine. Thus, a high proportion of population in nations such as the US are still not in favor of getting their vaccine shot. So much so that the government of the US has had to make it compulsory in many ways to get vaccines. It is compulsory for the government employees in the US to get the vaccines. Not just this, many big organizations, private organizations in the US are also asking their employees to get the vaccines, otherwise don't come back to work. Many of the European countries have banned unvaccinated people from coming into public places. In India, fortunately, we don't have such a situation. In India, most people, except a few, believe in the science behind vaccine and thus are taking the vaccine shots whenever it is available to them. So not just the government, it is the citizens also that have played a major role in ensuring that vaccine coverage in India is almost universal. Now let me show you some numbers and graph to highlight how well India's vaccination program has been going. In India right now, top 5 states where vaccination has helped save lives include Maharashtra, Delhi, Karnataka, UP and Tamil Nadu. Now this is from a recent report published by the SBI research team in which the report said that lives of over 1 lakh people were saved in just a couple of months of December and January just because they were vaccinated. And that is why the third wave did not really hit India very hard. India's numbers also are way ahead when you compare it with any other nation in the world, partly because we had to be way ahead because of the population that we have. Although India started vaccination much after US, Germany, Russia, France, UK, but our vaccination numbers are way higher than any of these countries if you look at their numbers. These vaccination numbers are till end of January, and now these numbers are even higher than the one that I showed in your table. Also, the Government of India, in a press briefing of the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, showed this graph to highlight how India has been performing in the third wave as compared to the second wave. An interesting point to note here is that while the new cases emerging every day on an average were not very different when you compare Jan 2022 and April 2021. In both these cases, the number of new cases coming up are over 3 lakh. But the interesting fact is, while in April it was resulting in over 3,000 deaths in a day, in Jan 2022 the number of deaths were cut down to only 380 a day. And that is mostly because of the number of people who have been vaccinated. While by April 2021, only 2% of India's population was fully vaccinated, in Jan 2022, the number actually jumped to 72%, which has showed how vaccination has helped people survive this third wave, not just in India, but in nations across the world. And that is why there is no logic behind any vaccine hesitancy that we are seeing in the developed nations right now. The next article that we have comes from the state of Andhra Pradesh after the Andhra Pradesh High Court recently asked the state government to shelve their plan of having 3 state capitals and go back to the plan of the old government of developing Amravati as their new capital. Now, the story starts from 2014 when Telangana state was formed and the city of Hyderabad was officially allotted to Telangana as their capital. Means Andhra Pradesh within the next 10 years had to build a new capital for themselves. The last government led by Chief Minister Chandrababu Naidu announced that we will be building our capital in Amravati. In 2019, however, Andhra Pradesh saw a new government come to power and the new government announced that we will not have our capital at Amravati only. Rather, we would have a concept of decentralized development. The new government said that we will have 3 capitals instead. First, Amravati, which will act as a legislative capital, so it would have the state legislative assembly. Then Visakhapatnam as the executive capital, so it would have all the offices of the minister, chief minister, governor, etc. And Kurnool, that will be the seat of the High Court of the state. Now, ever since the state government of Andhra Pradesh came up with this plan, there has been a lot of debate around this and a lot of people have opposed the idea, especially the farmers who had surrendered their land to the last government for building of the capital of Amravati. In fact, these farmers were the ones who actually went to the state high court asking the high court to intervene and asking the state government to go back to the original plan. And this is the high court verdict on the same petition. The state high court has said that the government cannot all of a sudden abandon the project to develop Amravati since almost 33,000 acres of land has been given up by the farmers and the government has already spent over 15,000 crore rupees in developing the area. In short, the High Court said 2 things. Number 1, if you have to split the capital, the state government does not have the power to do that. The state government cannot decide that we want to have more than 1 capital. Secondly, the High Court said that the farmers who willingly gave away the land to the last government gave away the land in the hope that Amravati will now develop into the center of the Andhra Pradesh state. It will be a bustling metropolitan city. And when the state government gives them the redeveloped plots back, those flats will now have a much larger value. Farmers will now be living in the state capital. And that was the hope under which the farmers had given their land to the last government. So now going back on the promise means that you are taking away this dream of the farmers because of which they had given you their land. That is why the High Court of the state has said that we are giving the state just 6 months of time. Within 6 months, give us a development plan for Amravati only as the lone capital and not these 3 capitals for 3 different parts of the governance. The government, on the other hand, has said that our idea behind having multiple capitals was that we needed to decentralize governance and make sure that fruits of development are in all parts of the state. Now, usually you see in most of the states in India, the state capital is the one where most of the investment comes in. You can take an example of Patna in Bihar. You can take an example of Lucknow in UP. You can take an example of almost every state in India, barring a few, where capitals are the ones that get most of the development, while the other cities of the state get neglected. The state government is saying that we are doing this so that the fruits of development are spread across the state and not just in one single city. However, the High Court did not accept this. The High Court has said that just because the decision of Amravati to be made the capital was taken by the last government doesn't mean that you can come and overrule that decision because you don't want to give the credit to the last government. Now, these are the three cities which were proposed by the new government to be made as the capitals of the state. That is Kurnool, Amravati, and Vishakhapatnam. And that is why the government is saying that we want development to be spread to almost all parts of the state and not just restricted to Amravati. Now, just a bit of history about how this three capital idea came into being. In 2020, the State Assembly passed a bill called the Andhra Pradesh Decentralization and Inclusive Development of All Regions Act, which said that there will be three seats of governance, that is legislative seat, executive seat, and the judicial capital. As I said, the idea was to give fillip to development in all parts of the state rather than just one single part. The governor of the state also gave his assent to the bill in July 2020, and thus everyone thought that the fate of the three capitals is sealed. However, the farmers who had given their land to the last government for building Amravati as a capital were not happy. They were the ones who challenged this decision of the government in the High Court. Now, this petition was filed in 2020 itself. But the reason why it got delayed was that after a few hearings, the Chief Justice of the Andhra Pradesh High Court was transferred and a new Chief Justice came in. So when the new Chief Justice came in, he made a new bench and the matter was heard from the scratch once again. And that is why the judgment of the Andhra Pradesh High Court got a bit delayed. Now, rather than going into who is right and who is wrong, let us also discuss the idea of having more than one capital. It does exist in India in more than one state. For example, Maharashtra, apart from Mumbai, also considers Nagpur as a part-time capital since the city holds winter sessions of the State Legislative Assembly. Himachal also has a couple of capitals, Shimla and Dharamshala. While the government runs from Shimla in the summers, it shifts to Dharamshala in the winters. Earlier, when Jammu Kashmir used to be a state, they also used to have two capitals, that is Srinagar and Jammu, depending upon the seasons. Now, some of the arguments given against the idea of having more than one capital is, number one, it will require a lot of logistics. See, although there are three parts of government, judiciary, executive and legislative, but their functions are interconnected, especially in the parliamentary form of government where members of legislature are also ministers. So for those people who are ministers and who are MLAs or MLC also, for them to travel from the capital of the legislature to capital of the executive, it would require a lot of time and a lot of cost, and that is why it is not really something that is an ideal situation for any state in India. Also, setting up three capitals means a lot of logistics would have to be sorted out, means a lot of expenditure would have to be done, and that is why we might have a problem that this particular idea might not translate on the ground in the way that the CM is hoping for. And that is why many people believe that while the state government has the right to approach the Supreme Court, and they most probably will, it was never really a great idea in the beginning itself. The next article again is based on what is happening between Russia and Ukraine, and it is talking about Russia's latest attack on Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Ukraine, that is the Zaporizhia power plant. Now, ever since pictures and videos came out of this nuclear power plant being attacked by Russia, a lot of fear spread throughout the world because no one in the entire world now wants to see another nuclear disaster after the ones that we have already seen and seen how destructive they can be. This is not just Ukraine but entire Europe's largest nuclear power plant and supplies about 1/5 of the total electricity in the country. This is the second nuclear power plant of Ukraine that is in the news after the Chernobyl plant in the north of Kyiv that was already captured by the Russian troops. The good part, however, is that as per the experts and the IAEA, there are no reports of any radiation or damage to the infrastructure of the nuclear power plant, and thus we do not expect any harm to the lives of the people living nearby. Now, while this news is about what Russia has been doing in Ukraine, but it brings to light multiple larger questions. Number one, what is it that the nations across the world are doing to safeguard their nuclear power plants? And second, is nuclear energy the safest form of renewable energy that we can have, or is it time to phase it out? Let's focus on both these questions. The first is, what are the nations doing to safeguard their nuclear power plants? Now, nations across the world which have nuclear weapons have adopted certain safeguards to ensure that their nuclear power plants are protected. For instance, for US, all their civil nuclear facilities are under the IAEA safeguard, that is, International Atomic Energy Agency. It is a group that makes guidelines and protocols to ensure that nuclear power plants around the world are working safely. They are a team of experts that visit these power plants and conduct inspections and submit their annual report to the UN General Assembly, although they don't work under the UN. Nations such as UK, Russia, France, and China have also ensured that their nuclear power plants are under the jurisdiction of the IAEA. What about India? India also has opened up all our nuclear power plants for the IAEA inspection, and all our nuclear power plants have been following the safeguards that are suggested by the IAEA. This was also one of the requirements under the India-US civil nuclear deal, and that is why we had to put all our nuclear power plants under the IAEA safeguards. Not just this, India specifically has taken one extra step. So the nation with which we are most likely to be engaged in a battle is Pakistan because of the history that we have had. So the two nations, that is India and Pakistan, in 1991 decided that it would be in the best interest of both the countries that every single year we should exchange the list of nuclear civil installations in each other's nations. So every single year on the 1st of January, India gives a list to Pakistan of our nuclear installations where they are located, and the same list Pakistan gives to India. The idea is that in case of any aggression, the two nations should not target the nuclear installations of each other's nations, because that would escalate the hostilities many times, and that is why both the nations should ensure that these kind of installations are not targeted. Obviously, the two nations don't share the location of their nuclear weapons or where their nuclear stockpiles are. These kind of exchange agreements or exchange of information is only limited to civil nuclear installations, which are mainly for nuclear power generation. Apart from this, the two nations also exchange a list of prisoners of each other's nations with every single year. One of the reasons why the two nations decided to sign such an agreement was because of what happened in 1981 between Israel and Iraq. So in 1981, Israel conducted a secret operation called Operation Opera. Under Operation Opera, the Israel Air Force conducted a strike on the Iraqi unfinished nuclear reactor, and that sent shockwaves across the world, and that is why many nations decided that it is time to at least not attack each other's nuclear installations, because that would result in a major outbreak of war which every nation wants to avoid. And that is why India and Pakistan also decided to sign such an agreement and exchange information every single year. Now, apart from this, the second question that we had in this article was, is the nuclear power the safest and the best way possible for renewable energy? The clear answer, at least for the developed nations, is no. In the past few years, we are seeing that there is a trend in the developed nations such as Germany, Japan, etc. to phase out nuclear power. That is because the world has seen multiple nuclear power disasters right now, including the one in 1979 called the 3 Mile Island Partial Nuclear Meltdown, then the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, which is the worst nuclear disaster that we have ever faced in the entire world, and the 2011 Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan after the tsunami hit Japan. All these three have told the entire world that the nuclear power plant, when it goes bad, it can be extremely destructive, and it is almost impossible to control the damage that we have when this kind of technology goes bad. That is why many nations who used to be dependent on nuclear power generation are actually phasing it out. For example, after Fukushima disaster, Germany decided to shut down 8 of its 17 reactors permanently, and pledged that the remaining will be shut down by 2022. In fact, that has what made Germany much more dependent on Russia for supply of natural gas. Then we also have Italy that voted to keep their country non-nuclear because of the Japan disaster. Then we have nations such as Switzerland and Spain that have banned the construction of new reactors. Not just this, nations such as Belgium, Germany, Spain, Switzerland plan to go non-nuclear completely by 2030. Globally, in the past few years, we see that while developing nations are still building their nuclear power capacity, including nations such as Turkey, even Bangladesh, India, but on the other hand, the developed nations are now seeing this as a threat to their stable way of life, and that is why they are giving up nuclear power in the past few years. The next article that we have again focuses on how India is abstaining from voting against Russia on different types of resolutions being introduced in the UN. This time, India abstained from voting at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva, where the resolution was being passed against Russia's aggression on Ukraine. The resolution has strongly condemned what Russia is doing in Ukraine, and it is saying that the rights of the people living in Ukraine are being violated by the Russian forces. It is estimated that over 6.6 lakh people have already left Ukraine and are refugees in nations surrounding Ukraine. As you would know, the UN Human Rights Council is a 47-member council, out of which India is a current member. There were 13 nations in all together, including India, that abstained from voting, which included China, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Sudan, Uzbekistan, and Venezuela. Now, while India abstaining from such a vote against Russia is not a big news, but it is also giving us a chance to revisit what exactly is the United Nations Human Rights Council and how does it work. Now, as you can understand, it is a part of the United Nations and is responsible for promoting and protecting human rights of the people across the world. This agency came into being in 2006 and it replaced the UN Commission on Human Rights. So the work that was earlier done by the UN Commission on Human Rights is now being performed by the Human Rights Council of the UN. As the article says, it has 47 member states which are elected by the UN General Assembly, and this membership is based on equitable geographical distribution. So making sure that adequate representation is given to all parts of the world. For instance, 13 seats are reserved for African states, 13 for Asia Pacific, 8 for Latin American and the Caribbean states, 7 seats for Western European and other states, and 6 seats for Eastern European states. The nations that are a member of the council usually serve a period of 3 years and are not eligible for immediate re-election after serving 2 consecutive terms. So as a nation, you can have 2 terms together. After that, you'll have to take a break of at least 1 term, and then again you can be re-elected back to this particular council. Just like many other UN resolutions, even this resolution does not really have any binding effect on Russia or the Russian government. Most of these are only symbolic gestures that are taken against these nations. Now, do note that Russia is not the only country against whom such resolutions are introduced or passed. In the past, we've also seen resolutions against Saudi Arabia, China, and other similar nations, but it has not had any impact on the day that the decisions are taken within these nations. This is India's 6th term in the UN Human Rights Council, and this is the 2nd consecutive term that we are serving, which started in Jan 2022 itself. These are the articles worth discussing from today's Hindu newspaper. Now a couple of practice questions. Number 1. Assess India's stand of abstention on the UN resolutions moved against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. Does it go against India's long-standing policy of non-violence and peaceful settlement of disputes? Second, with the possibility of a nuclear power plant disaster turning into an apocalyptic event being much more than other power generation methods, is it time for the world to look beyond nuclear energy? Comment. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words each. Thank you so much for watching the video.